The Traveling Travel Agency has been live for about a week, and I'm here to tell you that Big Spell Mage is a pretty good deck in Hearthstone that should be nerfed for play pattern reasons, but it is not the best deck in the game. So here are my picks for not only the top 5 decks in Legend, but the top 5 decks that hit Legend, as well as some fun picks that I think you guys might enjoy. And if you end up using one of these decks, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel because we're just gonna go ahead and get right into it. And if you want all of the most up-to-date pro Hearthstone decks in the meta right now, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're gonna be talking about Pipsi Paladin as being the best deck in the meta. Now, obviously, I do have some bias with this deck, but it's just insane how many people are hitting rank 1 Legend with this particular archetype, and how I went from rank 2000 to top 200 in less than a day only playing Pipsi Paladin. So I just want you guys to know that not only is this my favorite deck, but I really do believe this is one of the best decks in the game for the simple fact that Pipsi Paladin has a very, versatile game plan to where, yes, you can get like a big, Pipsi turn to where you can play it on turn 4, cheat out a big board, and you beat most board-based decks. But the greatest thing about this deck is how many different win conditions you have. Obviously, you have the Lanessa OTK. You have Horn in order to double up the Lanessa OTK that's already doubling up your Divine Bruise. You can just win with sheer tempo and just playing a bunch of minions. You have Conniving Conmen. For people that have been making the YouTube comments, I have been reading them. But yeah, Conniving Conman, absolutely great. And Paladin, if you want to see more up-to-date deck guides on this, I have like 4 different videos talking about Pipsi Paladin in particular. But this is my, my declaration saying that I really do believe this is the best deck in Hearthstone. And there is so much gameplay footage that I have of this deck that if you want to learn it, this is the place to be. But Lanessa Paladin is the best deck in Hearthstone, no questions asked. Next up is going to be a deck that I feel like a lot of you guys aren't going to believe is actually good because it's a rogue deck. Of course, rogue is just bad right now, so if we're playing a rogue deck, it's absolutely unwinnable, right? Actually, this deck is very good, and it's going to be very soon, I believe, that this deck's going to start picking up because I do have a deck guide coming out about this in particular pretty soon. But what is this deck trying to do? It's literally just trying to play this. That's literally the only direction of this deck, to the point where you have a dig for treasure to draw this card guaranteed because there are no other minions in the deck, and since it's a pirate, you also get a coin from it. A pretty nice upside for playing dig for treasure guaranteed, but the rest of the deck is literally going into making a large weapon, and for rogue in particular, if you don't draw the quick pick, you've got a hero power, so you can always get that turn 3 sword shiny, value, and then you can start adding in cards like Sharp Shipment, which really do make a difference because that +2 durability absolutely carries this deck. You're giving yourself 2 more swings for like 10 damage. This card is absolutely insane, but it is a very linear deck to where you just do one thing very well, and if your opponent happens to play one particular snake against you, you're going to be kind of sad. But that's the funny thing about this deck, is that as soon as it becomes meta relevant, people are just going to start playing Vipers in order to counteract it. But if you're not going up against a Viper meta, you should play this Face Rogue right now, because not only will you get the fastest wins that are available in the game right now, you can also, pump up Rogue's win rate, which desperately needs it right now. Next up, we've got Big Shaman, and yes, I really do believe that Big Shaman is one of the best decks in the game because at top 1000 Legend, this is like the anti-meta pick, where it's like, if someone's playing Big Spell Mage, this was the go-to archetype in order to counteract that deck for one simple reason. Being able to play Cliff Dive and then having a bunch of minions come out of nowhere, like a Golganeth or like a Walking Mountain, for example, and then evolving into a 10-drop that most likely is going to be a taunt minion. It's pretty freaking decent because you've got Amplified Elec, and you've also got, there's another taunt, Living Horizon. Yeah, there's Living Horizon, as well as, I believe, one other taunt. I think there's 3 taunts in the 10 mana pool. But regardless, yeah, Big Boy Shaman, Big Cliff Dive Shaman is extremely good because it is just the deck to where if you don't kill this deck, it will just heal out of range. That's why Walking Mountain is so amazing in this particular deck, because it's a legitimate win condition by itself to where it not only heals you for a bunch, but then you get the 10 drop out of it, and that is just, a gigantic swing in tempo, which is how I like, this particular Evolved Shaman seeing play. Hello, doggo. How are you doing today? But yeah, the thing is about this particular deck though is that there is a little bit of dyssynergies with cards like Carefree Cookie, for example, but the dyssynergies of this deck are not necessarily that bad when you think about all of the other situations to where you are high rolling, which is why we have the Fairy Tale Forest in here to kind of mitigate on those low rolls, because obviously you don't want to play Cliff Dive when you have your Razzle Dazzler, but this deck is still consistent enough to be a top player at top legend, even though Cliff Dive does have some minions that you don't want to pull. But the consistency of Hagatha drawing out the right cards in your deck, drawing your Frosty Decor, drawing your Cliff Dive, almost guaranteed, you know, just getting another minion out of the pool is extremely good for Cliff Dive. So I think that this deck works, you know, in a perfect amalgamation to where a newer player is going to be like, well, wait a minute, these cards desynergize. They do and they don't, and it's just kind of funny to, like, you know, toss up both options. But regardless, Big Shaman is an actual good deck at top 1000 legend, and if you want to play a deck that is going to confuse people as well as essentially counteract their deck, I think this is the version of the deck that you should try. I'm not 100% sure on the chill vibes in this particular deck, but at top 1000 legend, it seems to be making an impact. I gotta be honest with you guys, I don't think you're gonna like the next 3 decks because I hate to say it, Overheal Priest is still one of the best decks in the game for the simple fact that if you know how to play this deck and if you know how to counteract what you're going to be seeing on the ladder, very similar to Big Shaman, I feel like people are playing this deck because it can absolutely dismantle a lot of the meta decks right now. Simply put, Injured Hauler destroys board-based decks. Don't really know what else to tell you. This is just a fantastic card, and I've complained about it enough on this stream. But yeah, Overheal Priest, it's still a good deck. It's still seeing a lot of play at top 1000 legend. So if you're someone that enjoys this kind of gameplay, I would still play it because it is absolutely a top contender, a top 1000 legend. But I gotta be honest, man, I am so sick of seeing Adonis combos. Next up, we have the return of Odyn Warrior, and we can actually talk about a new mini-set card because Alloy Advisor, a card that I almost immediately dismissed, is actually a card that can be kind of decent in this deck for one of 2 reasons. One, well, I guess 3. One, it's a taunt. 3, it gains you armor, so that's just decent, you know, to help you survive. And then, of course, you know, there's the Odyn synergy to where maybe you can do something with, like, Aftershocks. You can play this into Aftershocks, gain a bunch of armor, remove the board while you're at it. But at the same time, that's a very slow combo. But the thing is about Odyn Warrior is that if you give a card that actually gains a lot of armor and it could somehow utilize it, Odyn Warrior will take advantage of it. And this is a deck that has been played by Mr. Yogg over at top 4 legend, I believe he's peaked at. He's currently streaming at rank 9s, and last I checked him as of like you know, noon as I'm recording this video, so he's still going hard on the ladder, still streaming at top 10 legend with this particular deck. But I do find it hilarious that Odyn Warrior, it finds a way, dude. Like, even at 9 mana, this card is still absolutely busted. It doesn't change the game plan that, you know, armor is just good when you gain health and then deal damage with it, because not only are you dealing 12, but you're gaining 12 itself, so you actually have a difference of 22 that you're putting up to your opponent. So yeah, Odyn Warrior, it's kind of crazy how this deck will never just seem to die, but if you are a hardcore, you know, Control Warrior, Odyn Warrior fan, this deck apparently is still legitimate enough to get you to top 10 legend. And next up, we have the next deck that I believe that everyone in top 1000 legend is going to be complaining about. It is now Drunken Owl Chalice Druid, and it's really funny because remember Concierge? Yeah, this card doesn't see play anymore. It's kind of funny how this 1 mana nerf really did, you know, prevent people from really experimenting with this card, because now it doesn't even see play in Druid, and if it doesn't see play in Druid, I don't know where this card is actually going to be slotted into, because no other class really cares about discounting cards from other classes that and make them 1 mana less. It doesn't make an impact. It doesn't do anything. And the reason why it doesn't do anything is because Druid has so much mana cheating already and so many ways of discounting cards that this is essentially your concierge. Because even though you may not play all of the all of the chalices for 0 mana, you're discounting all the other cards to where you have a lot more discounts, so that way the 0 mana chalices really don't matter because you still have plenty of mana to go. And one other, you know, great example of this is Sparkling Vial. Vial. Who cares about, you know, cheating out 1 mana cards, 0 mana cards, when you can literally choose any card in your deck and effectively make it 0 mana. Now, one thing that I do find is kind of interesting about this deck is that it's actually one of the first Druid decks in forever to not run an ENR. So if you want to run this deck because of that fact, I do find that kind of interesting. But the Summer Flower Child is literally only trying to draw the Alonius and the Sleep Under the Stars. Essentially, this is just a deck that is trying to draw its deck very quickly and burn down the opponent. That's right, Burn Down finally found its way into a Druid deck, and honestly, you might as well just take out this last sentence because it doesn't matter. You're always playing the cards. I think the only way that you can low roll with this card in particular is if you play it on turn 3 and then you immediately hit your Alonius. But the funny thing about that, it may not even matter. Number 1, your Alonius may not even be necessary in order to kill your opponent. Number 2, you're most likely going to still be able to play the Alonius because you still have all of this, you know, spell damage combos with the Sparkling Vial. So if you want to try and bring back Owl Druid, or if you really were someone that enjoyed the spell damage Druid archetype, this is the brand new evolution of the deck, to where I will be, you know, making a deck guide about this if I can get some clips with this deck. But yeah, if you like a degenerate combo decks, this is definitely going to itch that scratch, because when this deck pops off, it is degenerate. And the last deck that I'll talk about that has potential of hitting rank 1 legend or climbing at like top 100 legend ranks is going to be Blood DK. Now, I have to admit that this deck has kind of fallen off a little bit since the last week, and the reason why is because this was one of the main decks that people are actually using to specifically counter big Spell Mage. And now that the meta is kind of like, you know, adjusted a little bit, this is still a good deck, you know, in the vacuum of the meta that you will be encountering, but it does have some, you know, times where it feels like a typical Blood DK that's just sitting there doing nothing and waiting for your opponent to combo you, because there are a lot of OTKs in top 1000 legend. But the greatest thing about this deck, and one thing that I would actually probably recommend, is the fact that you do have Dirty Rats, so you can interact with those kind of combo decks. So if you're seeing a lot of them, it might be worth teching out one card in particular. I'm not going to tell you what, just feel free to take out a card you don't really feel like you need. Maybe like a Ruswat Viper, for example, if you're not seeing the weapon rogues. But you can easily put in 2 Dirty Rats to try and counteract some of these other combo decks that you will be experiencing. And if you can rat out the right minion, you will just win a lot of games. So that's the great thing about Blood DK, is that, yeah, there's a lot of situations to where you can't possibly win, but if you play this deck right, there's a lot of situations to where you can't possibly lose. So if you want to play some Blood DK, I would actually highly recommend it, because it is the best that this deck has been in probably over a year. And now we're going to start getting into the decks that are really good from Diamond through Legend, and yes, we are going to talk about Big Spell Mage, but here's the thing. You guys have already seen enough Big Spell Mage decks. Who really cares what the perfect 30 of this deck is, because the combo that only matters is just getting the Tsunami by turn 5. The rest of the deck could be a bunch of hot garbage, but if you draw the right cards that cheat this out by turn 5, your crappy deck is going to look like a good deck. So why not just embrace the crappy legendaries and go all in on trying to make a DJ Manastorm work? That's right, I'm suggesting DJ Manastorm Big Spell Mage, because I had to talk about this deck one way or another, but I wasn't going to talk about the original list. We already know how good that deck is, how it's probably going to get nerfed. But DJ Manastorm, you can finally utilize this card. And the funny thing about this is that they recently buffed this card, and it still is too slow for the actual perfect 30 of Big Spell Mage. So we have to give this card some love, because not a lot of people are really talking about it, except for like maybe Warshak, one of the only people that I know that really messes with DJ Manastorm. But the other thing about this particular list is the fact that we're just going all in on making DJ Manastorm good by also including cards like Audio Splitter, so you can have those big bombastic combos. Now we could go a step further by putting in the Galactic Orb, which would be really funny in my opinion. And honestly, you know, I'm just gonna put in the deck right now. Let's say screw Cult Neophyte, and we'll just put in the Galactic Orb. Bam, there you go. It's not a good deck. This is not a good deck. You could play any other Big Spell Mage, and it's probably going to be a little bit better just because we have all of these bad cards in our deck. But one major reason why a lot of people don't want to put the Orb in the deck is the simple fact that if you draw it with Cephalopods and you are not ready, it is by far one of the most synergistic things that you can do within this entire archetype. So if you don't want to take that risk, It's perfectly understandable, but if you want to have fun with big Spell Mage and you're not playing DJ Mana Storm, I'm sorry, you're not having fun, you're just trying to win the game by turn 5, and I think that's cringe. So play some DJ Mana Storm, try to take advantage of the audio splicer value that you can utilize, and maybe you could actually have fun with this archetype before they nerf it into the ground. I really believe Blizzard is probably going to axe this deck almost entirely. The next couple decks that we're going to be talking about are primarily decks that were really played to bully on big Spell Mage, and that's why these numbers have been completely boosted. But a lot of these decks are still fine by themselves. They are just really aggressive decks that were primarily used to beat big Spell Mage, and then once those numbers started going down, these decks just still were being played. So, you know, Painlock, it's still good. It's still pretty effective. The only new thing about this deck is the fact that Ziliax, you know, the people don't tend to agree on how to exactly put this into the deck, but one good utilization of it is obviously just, you know, just improving the stats of your minions. You have a really, you know, effective way of cheating out a bunch of minions all at once with Party Fiend. So you have this plus, you know, another minion. You can easily play Ziliax as early as like turn 3. So it's a very effective way at just, you know, stealing the board one way or another. I don't think I need to explain why Painlock is good, because it's like the 4th time that I put it in a top 5 deck video. But yeah, surprise, it's still really good, because as it turns out, 0 mana 8/8s and then putting yourself back to 15 with a 6/6 taunt in the way, yeah, it's still absolutely busted. Next up, we're going to be talking about Pirate Demon Hunter, and I do have to say it is very sad that I did, you know, see a list that runs this new Miniset card, but I got to admit, mate, it's just too slow. This is just not a card that really goes within the Demon Hunter archetype right now, because yeah, you could summon a bunch of stats out of nowhere, but not only do you have to have like a weapon already equipped and you have to like put your opponent off the field, it's just not really guiding the direction of your deck. Vanilla stats really don't go any direction with this style of deck, because it is all about the charge damage. It's all about the immediate, you know, hey, I've got my Burning Heart with my Sock Puppet on the field, and I'm about to storm you for a bunch of damage all at once. I do believe that Hot Coals makes a lot of sense now as like a way of like dealing with other board-based decks, as well as just using it as an aggression tool. But the funny thing that I really don't understand is that somehow the new weapon doesn't find a way into this deck, and I really wanted this to maybe work with like an Arana combo. Maybe we can put in like Molten Giants or something like that, but the biggest issue with Demon Hunter doing this in particular is the lack of healing. Aggro Demon Hunter and like Pirate Demon Hunter just doesn't have access to lifesteal and good and meaningful heals, so if you put yourself to 8, you're pretty much putting yourself within lethal range against a lot of decks, and the fact that you're always killing people by like turn 4, turn 5 more times than not, you really don't need the Molten Giant in order to help you out with that kind of combo. So going all in on like the Pain archetype really doesn't make a lot of sense, but Arana still can be utilized with cards like Brain Masseuse and Acupuncture. There are some other lists that are running around with Through Fell and Flames, but all of those lists I wasn't particularly a fan of. You can maybe squeeze in like one of these, for example, to try and like have that kind of combo, but the simple point and the simple truth of this deck is that it is just an aggro deck first and foremost, and then it OTKs and deals a bunch of damage second, because you want to play your pirates, you want to get your value, you want to hit them in the face with all the charge damage to the point where they're already sitting at like 15 HP by like turn 3, turn 4. So yeah, Pirate Demon Hunter, it's still good. I probably wasted way too much breath explaining why this deck is good, but I wanted to go through the other ideas that people were thinking about with this deck before eventually just going back and just settling on the exact same deck that they've pretty much been playing. But yeah, Pirate Demon Hunter didn't really benefit from the mini set almost at all. Now, one deck that did benefit from the mini set was actually Tolkien Hunter, and it's kind of funny because like I immediately called out this card for being bad, but if you really think about it, this is a fantastic card for something like Tolkien Hunter, because not only is it a strong turn 3, it's a very sticky minion, and you want a lot of minions in this particular deck. It's not exactly the best way of utilizing it, but you can work, horse, trade, and then play Saddle Up. I don't really know. I don't play Hunter. I think by that sentence by itself, you guys know how much Hunter I play. But this is like the deck that I'm seeing pop up at top 1000 Legend. I think Funky Monkey originally came up with a Tolkien Hunter that's getting a lot of play right now, as well as Ron Mexico is playing a Tolkien Hunter around top 200 Legend. Unfortunately, I couldn't find Ron's deck, but Funky Monkey's deck is on his YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. It's also on his Twitter account. He just posted a lot of good stats showing that it's pretty decent. But one thing I'm not really particularly sure about is the Grifta. Grifta feels a little bit weird in my opinion. For Hunter, yeah, you can have like some pretty interesting, you know, amulets that give Hunter some tools they don't really have access to. But I feel like this card might just be too slow. I don't know, just call it a hunch. But yeah, Tolkien Hunter, as I like to refer to it as, it's pretty decent. I don't want to talk much about it because I don't understand the deck, but for you Hunter mains that, you know, are always complaining about no Hunter deck in these videos, congratulations. Hunter is finally good enough to be in the top 5 video. It took a long time, but it finally happened. And the last deck that we'll talk about for Diamond through Legend decks is going to be Evolve Shaman. I hate to say it, but the Diamond through Legend ranks really are just play a deck that's really good at doing its thing and just spam the games. Because every single time that I make these videos, it's always like in Diamond through Legend what I would say are the easier decks to play, because this deck is just all in on just, you know, summoning tokens, getting a big wave turn out of nowhere, and then maybe using your matching outfits and your muck pools to get an insane scam out of nowhere with cards like Sea Giant, even like evolving like a Zilliax or something like that, and just like evolving, you know, minions that actually give you boards. So like, for example, you could have Muck Pools on 1, into Sigil of Skydiving on 2, play Cookie on 3, trade the 1/1s away to get 2 drops, and then you can Muck Pools to get a 3 drop. And keep in mind, this is turn 3, so you've not only removed your opponent's board, evolved into 2 drops, and then have an additional 3 drop, you now have even more pressure with the Cookie on the field, because if you get a taunt, that is just going to start steamrolling the game out of nowhere. So then you get to play your backstage bouncer, you have even more sticky minions and now taunts that are behind the carefree Cookie. That is one way that this deck is very effective. It's just a very simple 1, 2, 3, 4 curve that is very good at destroying Diamond through Legend decks that are not that optimized, or maybe you're going up against a deck that's too slow to deal with it. The point is, if you want to climb in Diamond through Legend, you want to just have a deck that does its goal and does it well. Whether that be a control deck that can deal with these aggro decks, whether it's an aggro deck that can go face and quickly, you know, close out the game before a deck can find its answers, or if you have a combo deck that you know your ins and outs of very well, so you can play it well and then have actually some W's to support it. So yeah, Evolve Shaman, it's a good deck, but the thing is about hitting Legend, in case you guys have never actually done it before, it's really just a case of committing to a deck, understanding how you win with it, and then playing the deck to its best outs. So all the decks that I've just shown you so far are easily decks that you can hit Legend with, but you're gonna have to play enough games to where you do get high rolled, you will be doing the high rolling, and you will have games that come down to actual decisions. So when it comes to hitting Legend in Hearthstone, almost any good deck can definitely do it, but you gotta be realistic on what the deck is actually going into in the meta. And now to close off this video, we're going to be talking about 8 fun archetypes that you can probably hit Legend with, but some of these archetypes I really wouldn't risk it with. But this is one of the archetypes I would actually recommend trying, because I actually haven't played this yet. That's right, Rainbow DK is starting to make a little bit of a comeback, and honestly, I'm all for it. I haven't seen Rainbow DK in a while, and I just want a deck that plays Climactic Necrotic Explosion, and this is one of those decks. I saw another Rainbow DK, it was actually a Highlander Rainbow DK, and it didn't run this card, so I would not recommend playing that deck. I'd recommend this deck instead for the obvious reason. But what is this deck good into? I honestly couldn't tell you. I really don't know what this deck is trying to bully right now on the ladder, because I feel like this deck in particular would lose to like Big Spell Mage, but now that Big Spell Mage numbers are starting to go down, you're starting to see these more interesting decks pop up. So if you want to give a test, you know, for Rainbow DK and maybe bully like some board-based decks like Paladin, for example, maybe this is one way that you could start doing that, and I'm actually going to start playing this deck at top 200 Legend, so if I have any good news to report, this will get its own deck guide. So yeah, Rainbow DK, go ahead and let me know how this deck works for you guys if you end up testing it out, because I love Rainbow DK. I'm going to play it almost as soon as I'm done editing this video. Next up, we have one of the many cube decks that I will be showing you, but in this particular video, I'm really trying to show you the absolute best cube decks in the ladder right now, but unfortunately, cube is just not a good card. It really saddens me. I've said this for like 3 videos now, and I will still have plenty of videos that are showcasing this card in particular in case you're just like me and you absolutely love cube. But yeah, the only real way that people have been able to win with this card is with this deck in particular, and I do find it very funny That Part Scraper literally doesn't find its way into this deck, but instead we have a different mana cheat card in order to help out with the combo, and that is Tortollan Traveler. The whole point of this deck is to try and discount the testing dummy one way or another, so that way you can pull it out from hand. You can either play Chemical Spill in order to summon it from your hand, and then you can maybe cube it if it survives. But the funny thing about this deck is that there are lots of ways of triggering the Death Rattle, like with Wreck 'em and Deck 'em and with Boom Wrench. So even if you don't end up getting your cube value, you still have potential of just rolling a bunch of testing dummies one way or another. Now, one interesting synergy to point out is the fact that you do have, new heights in order to increase your mana cap. So if you are somehow lucky enough to get to 11 mana, you can play testing dummy into Cubicle in one turn and do that kind of combo, but it's just way too slow at that point. So one card that kind of helps out with this is Marin. Maybe you can get a 0 mana testing dummy, maybe you can get a 0 mana cube. One card that I really wish we can fit into this deck, but it just is way too clunky, is the Dorian, because I would love the idea of getting testing dummies or even Ziliaxes for 1 mana, but it's just way too slow and way too inefficient. I really don't like Wreck 'em and Deck 'em, albeit it's very funny in the deck, but every single list that I'm seeing is putting this in the deck, so I guess you should run it. I really can't recommend a different card other than this, because copying the Death Rattle with cards like Crimson Expanse, for example, I'm sorry, but if you see a deck running this card, it is just bait. It's way too slow. Getting a copy of a minion that doesn't do something immediate and it gets dormant that can get countered by Reno, absolutely not. Bad card. But yeah. Cube Dummy Warrior, if you want to play a testing dummy deck or if you want to play a cube deck, this might be your best chance at actually having a high win rate with a fun deck. And next up is a deck that I actually encountered on ladder, but I have some bad news. I couldn't acquire the deck, so I decided to sit down for about 10 minutes and really think about how I would build this archetype after, looking at the cards that they added into their deck. The guaranteed cards that were played by my opponent were Pop-Up Book, Thrall's Gift, Malted Magma, Needle Rock Totem, Parrot Sanctuary, which means, they didn't play the Turbulus, but you have to run the Turbulus, Infected Watcher, as well as Eye of Chaos, and the Joymancer Geppetto. So these are all the cards that the opponent played in the game. The rest of the cards I kind of just, took an educated guess at. And there actually is a Tendy deck on HS Guru. If you look at all of the games on ladder, that's right, all of them, Diamond all the way through Top Legend. There was 50 games of it, and it was not a good list. So I think what happened is that guy took the guy that I played up against ended up taking that list on HS Guru, ended up changing it around a little bit, because one thing that you do have to point out with an archetype like this is how insanely funny Parent Sanctuary is with the Tendies, because Tendies are 1 mana. You can literally play Parent Sanctuary on turn 2, and let's just say you have Tendies in your hand for whatever reason, even though it's not likely. Let's say that you have, 5 Tendies in your hand while you play your Parent Sanctuary. You can literally tap this, play a 0 mana Tendy, tap this again, play another 0 mana Tendy, tap it again, play a third 0 mana Tendy, and you haven't even spent any mana yet, so you're still sitting at the top of your mana curve, just waiting to do something. So who knows what the spell's cast? It's a really funny idea, and I feel like this actually might be the best way of supporting it, because not only was Shaman already one of the best ways of playing Tendy decks, you've also got the Shutter Block, which really does support it. And now on top of that, you've got a really effective mana cheat way of actually playing the Tendies and getting them to do something immediately. For 2 mana, or for 4 mana essentially, you can play 6 free Tendies. That's really good in my opinion. Now the rest of the deck obviously is gonna suck. It's gonna suffer because it's Tendy Shaman, but we do have some control tools with cards like Malted Magma, Aftershocks, Baking Volcano, for example, as a way of sustaining. But one card that I think is kind of interesting that I'm not 100% sold on yet is maybe Cash Cow. Cash Cow can give you a way of, getting the coins, so that way you can get hand space, so you can throw out the Tendies, but it also gives you an idea of, coining out your Yogg in case you do need this for a big AoE or a big steal in the right moment. So maybe this card isn't necessarily, necessary in the deck, but I found it interesting to at least slot it in the deck because, cheating out cards and cheating out mana is essentially what this deck is doing. So if you want to play the most fun deck that I have crafted recently, this is probably going to be the best way of utilizing the Parrot Sanctuary and Shaman, or at least the most hilarious way of doing it. And the next deck we're going to be talking about is Dung Druid, because of course Travel Master Dungar is essentially just a Druid legendary. I really can't think of any other archetype except maybe a warrior deck that can utilize the Travel Master Dungar, and the only reason why I'm even saying warrior is because it has access to Trail Mix as well as the new heights. So warrior is one of the only other classes I feel like that can ramp fast enough to playing a card like Dungar and doing something meaningful with it. But the issue with warrior is that running an all-in deck that's trying to do something with Dungar, there are just way better strategies for warrior right now, so there's not anyone that's really experimented with that idea. So if you want to play Travel Master Dungar, you are pretty much all in on playing this particular Druid list. And like I said in my previous video, we are talking about Oaken Summons. We are now running 2 copies of it, but the one difference that I was wrong about is that people are running the Dorian, even though you do have the shot of Oaken Summons pulling the Dorian, and then you don't have anything really useful to pull from it. Because the one issue with this deck is that if you play Dorian, you're kind of just sitting there until you draw some cards, and unfortunately, you really don't have any card draw outside of Marin, Pendant of Earth, as well as like Malfurion's Gift if you have, you know, full mana crystals. So I imagine the Dorian is mostly in the deck in order to just get the Pendant. Maybe you can get like a double Dungar or something like that. Maybe you get the ENR, obviously, to do the typical stuff that Druid does. But yeah, I'm still not 100% sold on Dorian, but it is still a card that is running around. And one reason that you could also, you know, decide to run this in your deck is just the sheer fact that you can play it on turn 4, you know? Play it on turn 4, most decks can't deal with it. If you draw one card, it most likely will give you something. But I feel like with a card like Dorian, maybe we should run a card like Sleep Under the Stars, for example. Like, I don't know. It feels kind of weird that this card's not in the deck, but I don't know. This is the most popular version of the deck that I am seeing at top 1000 Legend. Is it the best version? I really don't know, because unfortunately, Dungar Druid is only going to be so good. You play the Dung as quickly as possible, and then maybe you can have some Hydration Station in order to help you sustain into the late game. But the simple truth about this deck is that if you are too slow and you can't play your Dungar, you are effectively playing a worse Druid deck compared to all the other ideas on ladder. So if you want to have some fun with Dungar, I'd highly recommend it. But if you're trying to hit Legend, this is probably going to be a deck I would not want to do that with, because it would take a long time. It's doable, but it would take way too long. Now, next up is a deck archetype that I have to admit I have not tested as much as I would want to with this kind of archetype, but I'm getting close, and I want to show you guys what exactly I'm cooking up here. Because this is like the Pipsi Paladin of Rogue, as I would like to refer to it as, where it's like I've got 3 different win conditions that I'm trying to juggle here, but I'm not really sure the best way of combining all of these archetypes, and maybe combining them is not the best way of making this sort of archetype work in the first place. So what exactly is going on here? The main goal of this deck was to somehow make Robocaller extremely useful in Rogue, and one idea that I had was that if you have 4 mana, you can play Robocaller, draw 3 cards that are dialed randomly. Let's say you have like, you know, 1, 2, and 3. You draw a 1, 2, and 3 cost card. And then when you Shadow Step it, you actually get the Robocaller with its original text. You draw an 8, an 8, and an 8 when you put it back into your hand or when you originally draw it. So the idea was to Shadow Step it intentionally and utilize the 8/8/8 card draw to summon essentially 4 drops for free. Play Everything Must Go automatically and tutor this from the deck. It's not exactly the greatest way of utilizing this, but it's a pretty cool idea that I feel like could, you know, somewhat go into a deck. I'm not 100% sure yet, because unfortunately, if I end up drawing this, I do not have Gear Shift in the deck, and it's just because I'm still not sure on the perfect 30 for this. So what you're hearing and what you're seeing right now is essentially me talking out loud and giving you my ideas on how to somehow make a deck like this work. Because yes, we have that main win condition of going for, like, you know, a bunch of card draw, but the other win condition is just, you know, playing coins and playing wells. Now this might be the first thing that we end up cutting from the deck, but I thought that running cards like Metal Detector, Manager, and Greedy Partner for like tempo and just doing stuff in the mid game makes a lot of sense to enable for this kind of high roll. Now obviously, like I said, we could end up cutting this from the deck, but another win condition is just the Sonya win condition on making a really big weapon with Cover Artist, you know, Valera's Gift. But as you can kind of see, We're all over the place right now. And the reason why I decided to do this is because I thought the Robocaller would give us enough consistent card draw to where we could decide which win condition to go for depending on the situation, to where I've even added a Sunspock Drake into the deck as the only 6-drop, so that way if we play Robocaller for a 6-drop and we don't like this, we can always just put it back into the deck and trade it. Now there's obviously possibilities of like doing this and then dealing damage, shadow stepping it, putting it back into the deck, and then playing the Robocaller again. I think that's a really interesting idea, but interesting doesn't win Hearthstone games, and as cool as this deck might be in theory, it's unfortunately not the greatest because I'm just trying to juggle way too many ideas, but unfortunately I couldn't really get any clips of this deck in order to show you it in action, but I wanted to at least put it in this video because I want to let you guys know that I am always trying to make the next meta breaker in Hearthstone. They don't always work, but this is one kind of funny way of going about it. But the issue with Rogue is that it's funny, but I'm not laughing anymore. Some Rogue decks are just really bad right now. Next up, we're going to talk about the fact that Cube Hunter doesn't exist and why. Why can Cube not go in this deck? It really drives me crazy. Carnivorous Cubicle is not good to the point where we can't even run it in Egg Hunter, for example. But the reason why we're going to be talking about this is because I ended up making a claim in one of my previous Hunter videos talking about how Sasquatch probably wasn't that good of a card to put in Egg Hunter. I'm here to tell you that I'm wrong. Sasquatch in Egg Hunter is actually extremely effective. And one way that I can kind of sell you on that is that, you know, imagine you do like your typical egg combo. You play 1 mana egg into Yelling Yodeler on turn 5, and then you get a Sasquatch. So then you play the Sasquatch, you can get another egg, and if for some reason you end up having an egg die, or if you trade that 1/1 away, you can get another Sasquatch, you will get a lot more value to where you just keep getting turn after turn after turn of just big boards, essentially enabled by one card. Now, this isn't like a card that you would play like turn after turn after turn after turn, because keep in mind, if you play like a Sasquatch and then that's it, and then you play Sasquatch next turn, it's obviously not going to do a whole lot. So it's just a really interesting synergy that I wanted to point out because I really do believe that Sasquatch does belong in this kind of archetype now. And I was messing around with cards like Tyrannus, not really a big fan of this in particular. But in case you're wondering on the ETC, Ruswat Viper, Hearthstone Brew, and Snoozing Zookeeper. This to screw over the Rogue archetype, this in case you need a brand new win condition because you end up drawing all your big beasts, or Snoozing Zookeeper for, get this, to counter Overheal Priest, because it gives them, I think, what, a 5 mana card? Yeah, or I'm sorry, an 8 mana 8/8, so you can even deny the Amanthul against Priest in particular. So I thought this was just a really funny, you know, utilization of this card because I don't think I've seen anyone hard run this in their deck. But yeah, it's a pretty funny way of trying to deny the meta decks with the ETC inclusions, but other than that, it's typical, you know, Egg Hunter with like Beastal Magnus, Always Bigger Jormungandr, and Parasite in order to combine it with the Hound in order to have, you know, a gigantic burst combo out of nowhere. So this is probably going to be the best way of playing Hunter if you don't want to play the Tolkien Hunter, and I really do enjoy, you know, this deck on principle, but I gotta say, it's very sad to me that Cube doesn't find its way into this deck. Maybe I play some more of it, but I really want a Cube in here. It's really sad it doesn't find its way, though. One of the last decks that we'll talk about, yet another Cube deck, is a deck that I've already talked about in a previous video. It is Booty DK with the Cube. It's not that good. It's pretty decent, but one card that I really want to talk about is Eternal Layover, because I feel like if Blizzard has this card on their radar, and if they decide to buff this to like 3 mana, for example, I feel like this card could become suddenly an extremely useful way of clearing boards. For the idea that you can play this with Molten Magma, for example, not in this deck in particular, obviously, but if you do this with like with the Horizon's Edge, for example, it is a very good way of clearing the board to where, let's say I play this on turn 4, turn 5, and then on like, you know, turn 5, turn 6, I end up playing Eternal Layover into like a hero power, maybe, you know, put in a Horn depending on if it's 5 mana or not. But yeah, the point that I'm trying to make is that if your opponent has 7 minions and you already have a Horizon's Edge on the field, you play Eternal Hangover. Those 7 minions now have 1 HP. You can play the Horizon's Edge. It'll deal 3, hopefully not going face, and then you can play a Hero Power, kill another minion, and then do the Horizon's Edge. Hope you don't hit face again, and that is a full board clear. Now, granted, there is some RNG involved, but just think about the potential of this card if Blizzard were to do something with this, because I feel like this card is just on the edge of being good, and since we have some balance patches coming up, they've been buffing a lot of cards recently. So I just want to put this out there. Maybe this could be good, because I feel like I immediately dismissed this card, but it actually has a lot of potential if it just gets like 1 or 2 more cards of support. But yeah, typical booty DK. If you haven't seen the video, I'd highly recommend it, but just in case you haven't, the whole point of this deck is to get as many of these death rattles procced as possible, and you can do that with cards like Buccaneer to give this card Reborn. When you freeze 3 random enemies, it deals 5 damage to any targets that were already frozen. So if you can somehow spread the death rattles, double them up with Yelling Yodeler, or cube the cards, you can keep your opponent frozen for a lot of turns. Now, granted, this is not the best deck on the meta. I would not recommend climbing to Legend with this type of deck, but if you're somebody that really likes the idea of booty DK, I'm not going to tell you not to play it. It's a really fun deck, and I managed to, break even with about 14 games with this deck under my belt. And the last deck that I'm going to talk about, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm actually talking about a Reno deck. And you want to know something? I still refuse to craft this card. It is not in my collection, but I will at least be mature enough to say that if I did play a Reno deck, if I was going to choose to play any sort of Reno Lone Ranger archetype, it would be the Shaman deck right now. I think that this Shaman deck is actually really fun in theory, but unfortunately, like most Reno decks, it's just, oh, did I draw the card that I wanted in this particular match? No, I didn't. I'm very sad now. So unfortunately, I'm not going to endorse this deck officially, but I will put it on the channel just to let you guys know that I still hate Reno. I still hate this card with every burning bone in my body. But you want to know something? I like Incendious. That's why I'm willing to look the other way. Incendious with Shoulder Block makes me extremely happy, and I will showcase the deck that could somehow utilize this particular combo, because I am very sad that Incendious does not see more competitive play. I thought this card was going to be nuts when it was first released, but yeah. Highlander Shaman, it's a pretty decent deck. The deck that you're seeing is from No Hands Gamer that I believe peaked at rank 4 Legend with this particular deck. But this was during the time where people are trying to counter big Spell Mage. This deck was pretty decent at doing that, but unfortunately, it really doesn't beat all the other decks that have been emerging in the past week. So yeah, if you want to play, in my opinion, the most fun Reno deck available right now, I would play Reno Shaman, but I am never gonna tell you guys to play this card. If you can actually do it, if you can actually go your entire life without playing this card, I think that that's a good thing. You should do that. Never play Reno decks, guys. Not only are they bad, they're not fun. Am I right? Am I right, YouTube comments? You guys will get me in the YouTube comments. Reno sucks, aren't I right, guys? But there you have it. Those are the best decks in the meta, as well as some other decks you can hit Legend, plus some fun ideas that you can play against your friends. If Grinding Ladder just isn't something that you like, because I gotta be honest, Grinding Ladder has been driving me crazy recently, and that's because Big Spell Mage is just all over the place, but it's starting to die down. People realize it's not the best deck in the game anymore, but it is still just a deck that every single time I see it now, it's making me see red. It's almost getting as bad as my hatred for Reno, to where if I see Tsunami, I might just concede games from here on out. But regardless, thank you so much for making it to the end of this deck breakdown. Go ahead and type in Tsunami sucks in the title, or in the comments, because yeah, I don't like Tsunami. It was very unfortunate that Tsunamis in Reno were the most popular decks this past week, but as you can see, I still found a way to have fun with Hearthstone, even though these decks that are driving me crazy are all over the place. So if you like this kind of content, subscribe, like, yada yada yada, Patreon, all this sort of stuff. I haven't made a video like this in a minute, so I feel like I owed it to you guys, because I haven't talked about good decks in a minute, but still, the meta is not making me particularly happy unless you play Pipsi Paladin. So thank you so much for making it to the end of this deck breakdown, and we'll see you for the next video.